She stood at the altar in a dress that cost more than most villages, married a man who ruled with fang and fury, and by midnight, he'd already thrown her aside like spoiled meat. But Elara Voss wasn't the kind of woman who broke easily. In a kingdom where weakness meant death and alphas feasted on fear, she was about to teach the most dangerous predator alive a lesson he'd never forget. Never mistake silence for surrender. If you want to see how a woman with nothing but her spine and her wits brought the most feared king in the realm to his knees, stay until the end. And if you're watching from your city right now, drop it in the comments. I want to know where my survivors are watching from. Hit that like button, because this story gets wild. The first time Elara Voss saw Kyle Draven, she thought he looked like a man who'd forgotten how to smile. Or maybe he'd just never learned. He stood at the head of the great hall in Castle Thornridge, arms crossed, face carved from granite and bad intentions. The wedding guests, mostly his people, his generals, his snarling pack of enforcers, watched her approach the dais like they were counting the seconds until she tripped, or bolted, or did something appropriately pathetic. She did none of those things. Elara walked the length of that stone corridor in a gown the color of winter fog, her spine straight, her chin level. The dress was beautiful, heavy, ridiculous really for a woman about to bind herself to a man she'd met exactly once before today in a treaty negotiation that had lasted 4 hours and left her feeling like livestock being appraised. Her father, Lord Anson Voss, minor human nobility from the southern plains, had brokered the marriage as a peace offering. Kyle Draven ruled the Stormclaw Dominion, a brutal stretch of frontier territory where wolves ran the land and humans either bent the knee or disappeared into the woods in pieces. The Dominion had been expanding, swallowing villages, burning crops. The human territories were losing badly, and everyone knew it. So they did what the desperate always do. They offered a daughter. Elara wasn't stupid. She knew what she was. A bargaining chip in a dress, a signature on a contract written in her own blood. But she also knew this. If she was going to be sold, she'd at least walk to the altar like she owned the damn floor. The hall smelled like smoke and wet fur. Torches lined the walls, their flames casting jagged shadows across the faces of the gathered alphas and their mates. Most of the crowd was wolf-born, tall, broad, eyes that gleamed too bright in the firelight. A few humans sat near the back, stiff and uncomfortable, probably minor diplomats sent to witness the spectacle. Kyle didn't move as she approached, didn't smile, didn't even blink. His eyes were storm gray, cold as a northern river in winter. His hair was dark, just long enough to look like he'd stopped caring a year ago. He wore black leather and steel, no ceremonial robes, no crown. But everyone in that hall knew exactly who ruled. Elara stopped 3 feet from him, close enough to see the faint scar along his jaw, close enough to smell steel and snow on his skin. "Lady Voss," he said. His voice was low, flat, the kind of voice that didn't ask questions because it didn't need to. "Alpha Draven," she replied. A ripple of murmurs ran through the hall. Apparently she was supposed to call him Your Majesty or My King or something equally degrading. She'd read the treaty. It hadn't said anything about titles. Kyle's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. More like a predator deciding whether something was amusing or just annoying. "You're punctual," he said. "I'm practical." "Good. I don't have time for theatrics." "Neither do I." Behind him, one of his generals, an older wolf with scars running down the side of his face, leaned in and muttered something. Kyle's eyes never left hers. "Then let's get this over with," he said. The ceremony was short, brutal in its efficiency. A priestess, some half-feral woman in ragged robes who smelled like moss and old blood, recited the old words, the binding words. Kyle gripped Elara's wrist, not gently, and sliced a shallow line across her palm with a silver blade, then his own. Their blood mixed, dripping onto a stone basin that sat between them. "Blood calls to blood," the priestess intoned. "Bond forged, bond sealed." Kyle released her hand. Elara watched the cut close slowly, the sting fading into a dull ache. "Congratulations," he said. There was no warmth in it, no affection, just the sound of a man checking a box. The hall erupted in howls and cheers, his people celebrating the alliance, the expansion, the victory. Elara stood there, blood still wet on her palm, and felt nothing. No, that wasn't quite true. She felt cold. Yeah. The feast was worse. Long tables stretched the length of the hall, piled high with roasted meat, dark bread, flagons of wine that smelled sharp and bitter. The wolves ate like they hadn't seen food in weeks, tearing into haunches of venison, cracking bones, licking grease from their fingers. Laughter rang out, loud and rough, punctuated by the occasional snarl or shove as dominance games played out over the dinner table. Elara sat beside Kael at the high table. He hadn't spoken to her since the ceremony, hadn't looked at her. He drank sparingly, ate less, and spent most of the meal in low conversation with the scarred general, a man named Greaves, she'd learned, and a younger wolf with copper-red hair who kept glancing at her like she was a curiosity in a menagerie. She picked at her food. The venison was good, rich and smoky, but her stomach was a knot of tension she couldn't untangle. Around her the celebration roared on, but it felt distant, like she was watching it from behind glass. "You should eat," said a voice to her left. Elara turned. The copper-haired wolf was leaning toward her, grinning. He had sharp features, bright eyes, and the kind of smile that suggested he found most things funny. "I'm fine," she said. "You look like you're about to faint." "I'm fine," he laughed. "Ronan Hale," he said, extending a hand. "Second alpha of the northern packs. Also, the only person at this table with a sense of humor." Elara shook his hand briefly. His grip was firm, warm. "Elara Voss. I know who you are. Everyone knows who you are. You're the peace offering." "Charming." "I didn't mean it like that." Ronan leaned back in his chair, still grinning. "I just mean, well, you're the first human queen we've had in, what, a century? That makes you either very brave or very unlucky." "Both," Elara said. Ronan's grin widened. "I like you." "You don't know me." "Not yet." Kael's gaze snapped toward them. For just a second, those storm-gray eyes locked onto Ronan, and Elara saw something flicker there, something sharp and cold. Then it was gone. "Ronan," Kael said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a blade. "Don't you have somewhere else to be?" Ronan held up his hands in mock surrender. "Just being friendly, Your Majesty." "Be friendly somewhere else." Ronan shot Elara a quick wink, then rose and wandered off toward the lower tables, where a group of younger wolves were arm wrestling and making increasingly stupid bets. Kael turned back to Greaves. Elara sat in silence, feeling the weight of the room pressing down on her. This was her life now. Mat. When the feast finally ended, hours later, when the wine had run low, and half the wolves were either passed out or fighting in the courtyard, Kael stood. "It's late," he said, addressing the room. "The queen and I are retiring." A chorus of hoots and jeers followed. Someone threw a piece of bread. Elara's face burned, but she kept her expression smooth. Kael didn't wait for her. He just turned and walked toward the side exit, his generals parting to let him through. Elara rose, ignoring the stairs, and followed. The walk to the royal chambers was long and silent. The castle was a labyrinth of stone corridors, dimly lit by oil lamps that flickered in the draft. Servants pressed themselves against the walls as they passed. Guards shouted stiffly. Kael walked fast. Elara had to lift her skirts to keep up. When they reached the heavy oak doors at the end of the east wing, Kael pushed them open and stepped inside. Elara followed, her heart pounding now, though she wasn't sure why. The room was large, sparse. A bed dominated the far wall, massive, draped in furs and dark wool. A fire burned low in the hearth. There were no decorations, no softness, just stone and shadow. Kael turned to face her. "This is your room," he said. Elara blinked. "Our room?" "No." Kael's voice was flat, final. "Yours. I have my own quarters down the hall." The words landed like stones. Elara stared at him. "I don't understand." Kael's jaw tightened. "You don't need to. The marriage is political, a treaty requirement. Nothing more." "Then why?" "Because it was necessary." He cut her off, his tone sharp now. "Your father needed protection. I needed leverage. We both got what we wanted, but don't mistake a signature for something it's not. Elara's hands curled into fists at her sides. So I'm just decoration. You're the queen, Kael said. You'll be treated as such. You'll have servants, guards, anything you need, but don't expect... He stopped, his expression hardening. Don't expect anything beyond that. Why? The word came out harder than she'd intended. Kael looked at her for a long moment. Something flickered in his eyes, something almost human. Then it was gone. Because my heart already belongs to someone else, he said quietly. The room went very still. Elara felt the words like a slap. Not because she'd expected love, she wasn't that naive, but because of the casual cruelty in the admission. He didn't even have the decency to lie. I see, she said. Her voice was calm, steady. She refused to let it shake. Kael turned toward the door. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll begin the formal introductions. You'll meet the court, the council. Learn the protocols. He paused at the threshold, his back to her. And Elara? She didn't answer. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Then he was gone. The door closed behind him with a heavy thud. Elara stood there in the center of the room, alone, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Her hands were still clenched. Her chest felt tight, hot, like something inside her was trying to claw its way out. She looked around the room, at the bed she'd sleep in alone, at the cold stone walls, at the furs that smelled like someone else's life. Then, slowly, she unclenched her fists. All right, she said softly to the empty room, if that's how it's going to be. She walked to the mirror on the far wall, a tall, silver-edged thing that reflected her pale face and tired eyes. She looked at herself for a long moment. Then she smiled. Not a happy smile. Not a kind one. A smile that said, You just made a mistake, Alpha King, because Elara Voss had been underestimated her entire life. By her father, by the diplomats, by every man who'd ever looked at her and seen something soft, something breakable. Kael Draven had just joined that list, and she was done breaking. The next morning, Elara woke to sunlight streaming through the narrow window and a servant knocking softly at the door. My lady? The voice was young, uncertain. The king requests your presence in the council chamber. Elara sat up, rubbing her eyes. She'd barely slept, spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying Kael's words over and over until they'd lost all meaning. I'll be there, she called. The servant hesitated. Shall I help you dress, my lady? Elara glanced at the wardrobe in the corner, heavy, dark wood, filled with gowns she hadn't chosen. No, I can manage. She heard the servant retreat down the hall. Elara rose, washed her face in the basin by the window, and dressed quickly. She chose a simple gown, deep green, high-necked, no embroidery. Something that said, I'm not here to be ornamental. When she was ready, she stepped into the corridor. A guard was waiting, a tall, silent wolf with amber eyes who gestured for her to follow. She did, memorizing the turns, the stairways, the layout of this place that was supposed to be her home. The council chamber was on the lower floor, a circular room with a long stone table and narrow windows that let in slashes of pale morning light. Kael was already there, standing near the head of the table, arms crossed. Greaves stood beside him, along with two other men Elara didn't recognize. One older, gray-haired, with the look of a scholar. The other younger, lean, with cold blue eyes. They all turned when she entered. Lady Voss, Greaves said, inclining his head slightly. General, Elara replied. Kael's gaze flicked over her, brief and assessing. Sit. Elara sat. The chair was hard, uncomfortable. She kept her spine straight. This is Chancellor Oren, Kael said, gesturing to the gray-haired man. He oversees the Dominion's legal and administrative functions, and this is Captain Lucien Var, head of intelligence. Lucien's cold eyes lingered on her a moment too long. Elara met his gaze without flinching. We're here to discuss your role, Kael continued. As queen, you'll be expected to attend certain functions, represent the crown at public events, manage the household staff. Manage, Elara repeated. Yes. So I'm a steward. Kael's jaw tightened. You're the queen. Then why does it sound like you're describing a housekeeper? Greaves coughed. Chancellor Oren looked uncomfortable. Lucian's mouth twitched into something that might have been a smirk. Kael leaned forward, bracing his hands on the table. What exactly do you want, Elara? I want to know what I'm actually allowed to do, she said evenly. If I'm just a figurehead, say so. But if I'm the queen, then I should have authority, responsibility, something more than arranging flowers and nodding at dignitaries. You don't understand how things work here. Then teach me. Kael stared at her. The room was silent. Finally, Greaves spoke. She has a point, Your Majesty. If the court sees her as powerless, it undermines the alliance, gives the impression that we don't respect the treaty, or her people. Kael straightened slowly. Fine, he said. You want responsibility? You'll oversee the southern villages. Trade agreements, resource allocation, conflict resolution. Report directly to me. Elara blinked. That was more than she'd expected. And if I fail, she asked. Kael's eyes were hard. Then you prove me right. She held his gaze. I won't. We'll see. The meeting continued for another hour, dry discussions of grain shipments, border patrols, tariff disputes. Elara listened, asked questions when she didn't understand, and took mental notes of everything. She could feel Lucien watching her the entire time, his expression unreadable. When it was over, Kael dismissed them all with a curt nod. Elara rose, but as she turned toward the door, Kael's voice stopped her. Elara. She turned back. The others had already left. It was just the two of them. Yes? Kael's expression was unreadable. Don't mistake this for trust. I don't, Elara said. I'm just doing what you asked, making it easier. She left before he could respond. The days that followed settled into a strange, tense rhythm. Elara threw herself into the work Kael had given her. She met with village leaders, read reports, mediated disputes over grazing land and water rights. It was tedious, exhausting, and frequently frustrating, but it was hers. For the first time since arriving at Thornridge, she felt like she had a purpose beyond standing in the right place and looking appropriately regal. The castle slowly became less foreign. She learned which corridors led where, which servants could be trusted, which guards would answer her questions, and which would just grunt and walk away. She learned that Greaves was gruff but fair, that Chancellor Oren was smarter than he looked, and that Captain Lucien Var made her skin crawl for reasons she couldn't quite articulate. And she learned that Kael Draven was a ghost in his own castle. She saw him at meals sometimes, always at the far end of the high table, always surrounded by generals and advisors. He never spoke to her unless protocol demanded it, never looked at her for longer than necessary. It was like she didn't exist. At first it stung. Then it stopped. Because Elara realized something important. If Kael didn't see her, then he wouldn't see what she was doing. And what she was doing was building. She made allies among the human staff, quiet, invisible people who knew every secret the castle held. She befriended the blacksmith's daughter, who brought her information from the lower town. She earned the grudging respect of a few of the younger wolves by handling a violent property dispute with enough pragmatism that even Greaves admitted she'd done well. Slowly, carefully, she carved out a place for herself. And then Ronan Hale came back. It was a cold afternoon in early autumn when he arrived, riding into the courtyard with a small retinue of northern wolves, all of them laughing and shouting like they were coming home from a victory tour. Elara was in the courtyard when they arrived, overseeing a shipment of grain from one of the southern villages. She looked up at the sound of hooves and saw Ronan dismount, grinning like a fool, his copper hair wild in the wind. "Elara!" he called, waving. She couldn't help it. She smiled, just a little. Ronan jogged over, leaving his wolves to handle the horses. "Look at you," he said. "Actual work. I'm impressed." "Don't be," Elara said. "It's just grain." "Still counts." He glanced at the workers unloading sacks from the wagons. "How's queenly life treating you?" "It's complicated." Ronan's grin faded slightly. "Yeah, I heard." Elara frowned. "Heard what?" "That our beloved king is still sleeping in his own quarters. That you're running half the Dominion's southern affairs by yourself. That Lucien Var has been asking a lot of questions about you." Elara's stomach tightened. What kind of questions? The nosy kind. Ronan's tone was light, but his eyes were serious. Be careful, Elara. Lucien doesn't ask questions unless he's looking for leverage. I'm not doing anything wrong. I know, but that won't matter if he decides you're a threat. Before Elara could respond, a voice cut across the courtyard. Ronan! They both turned. Kale stood in the shadow of the main gate, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Your Majesty, Ronan said, inclining his head. Good to see you. Kale's gaze shifted to Elara, then back to Ronan. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. Ronan shot Elara an apologetic look, then followed Kyle back toward the castle. Elara watched them go, a knot of unease settling in her chest. She didn't see Kyle for the rest of the day. But that night, lying alone in her too large bed, she heard footsteps in the corridor outside her door. Slow, deliberate. They stopped. Then, after a long moment, they moved on. Elara stared at the ceiling, her heart pounding, and wondered what the hell was happening in the mind of the man who'd married her and then thrown her away. She didn't sleep much that night, and when she finally did, she dreamed of wolves. The first time someone tried to kill her, Elara almost missed it. She was in the lower archives, 3 levels beneath the main castle, searching through dusty ledgers for trade records that would help resolve a boundary dispute between 2 southern villages. The room was narrow, lined floor to ceiling with shelves crammed full of moldering books and rolled parchment that smelled like decay and old ink. A single lantern hung from a hook near the door, casting weak orange light that barely reached the corners. She'd been down there for hours. Her back ached, her eyes burned. But she was close. She could feel it. The numbers weren't adding up, and if she could just find the original survey maps from 30 years ago, she could prove that one of the village elders was lying through his teeth about property lines. She heard the footsteps too late. Heavy, quick, coming down the stone staircase behind her. Elara turned, squinting into the shadows beyond the doorway, and saw a shape move. Fast, low, wrong. Her instincts screamed. She dove sideways just as something whistled past her head and slammed into the shelf behind her with a crack that sent books tumbling to the floor. A knife, embedded in the wood where her skull had been. Her heart went from normal to hammering in the space of a single breath. She scrambled backward, her hands scrabbling for purchase on the stone floor, and saw the figure step into the light. A man. Human. Thin, wiry, with a face she didn't recognize and eyes that were flat and dead. He yanked the knife free and came at her again. Elara grabbed the nearest thing she could reach, a heavy ledger, and swung it at his face. It connected with a satisfying thud. The man stumbled, cursed, blood streaming from his nose. She didn't wait. She bolted for the door. He caught her by the hair. Pain exploded across her scalp as he yanked her backward. She screamed, loud, raw, furious, and drove her elbow into his ribs as hard as she could. He grunted, but didn't let go. The knife came up, glinting in the lantern light. Then a roar split the air, low, guttural, inhuman, and something massive hit the man from the side, slamming him into the wall with enough force to crack stone. Elara collapsed to her knees, gasping, her vision swimming. She looked up and saw Greaves, his face twisted into something between rage and wolf, holding the man by the throat against the wall. The general's hand was half shifted, claws instead of fingers, fur bristling along his forearm. "Who sent you?" Greaves snarled. The man spat blood. "Go to hell." Greaves squeezed. The man's face went purple. "I'll ask once more." The man's lips moved, but no sound came out. His eyes rolled back. Greaves dropped him. The body hit the floor like a sack of grain. Greaves turned to Elara. His eyes were still glowing amber, predatory. "Are you hurt?" Elara shook her head, even though her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't make them stop. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're bleeding." She looked down. Her forearm was sliced open, a shallow cut she hadn't even felt. Blood was dripping onto the floor. "Come on," Greaves said, his voice gentler now. He shifted back fully, his hand returning to normal. "We need to get you out of here. The records, forget the records. Someone just tried to kill you." Elara let him pull her to her feet. Her legs felt like water. As they climbed the narrow stairs back toward the main levels, she heard guards shouting, boots pounding stone. By the time they reached the council chamber, half the castle seemed to know something had happened. Kael was waiting. He stood near the window, arms crossed, his face unreadable. When Greaves brought Elara in, Kael's gaze snapped to her, to the blood on her arm, the dirt on her dress, the wild look in her eyes, and something flickered across his expression, something sharp and almost violent. What happened? His voice was quiet, too quiet. Assassin, Greaves said, in the archives. Human, dead now. Kael's jaw tightened. Who was he? No idea. Lucian's running his face through the records now. Kael crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed Elara's arm, not roughly but firmly, turning it to inspect the cut. She flinched. His grip loosened immediately, but he didn't let go. This needs stitches, he said. I'm fine. You're not. Kael's eyes met hers, and for the first time since their wedding night, she saw something raw there, something that looked almost like fear. Greaves, get the healer, now. Greaves left without a word. Elara pulled her arm free. I don't need you to take care of me. Clearly you do, since someone just tried to gut you in my own castle. Your castle, Elara repeated. Right, because that's what matters. Kael's expression hardened. What's that supposed to mean? It means maybe if you'd spent less time pretending I didn't exist, someone wouldn't have felt bold enough to come after me in broad daylight. That's not, isn't it? Elara's voice rose, all the fear and adrenaline twisting into something sharper. I'm your wife in name only. I have no real authority. Half your court thinks I'm a joke. And now someone's trying to kill me. So forgive me if I don't feel particularly grateful for your sudden concern. Kyle stared at her, the silence stretched, tight and dangerous. You think I don't care if you die, he said slowly. I think you made it very clear what I am to you, Elara shot back. A political necessity, nothing more. Kael's hands clenched at his sides. For a moment she thought he might actually say something real, something human, but then his walls came back up, cold and absolute. Get that arm treated, he said, and stay out of the archives until we figure out who's behind this. He walked out before she could respond. Elara stood there, alone in the council chamber, her arm throbbing, her chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to tears. She swallowed them down, forced her breathing to steady. She'd survived worse than this. She'd survive him too. The healer was an old wolf named Mara, bent and gray, but with hands that were steady and sure. She stitched Elara's arm in silence, her expression neutral, and then wrapped it in clean linen and told her to keep it dry. Thank you, Elara said. Mara studied her for a long moment. You've got spine, girl. That's good. You're going to need it. Why? Because the ones who tried to kill you today won't stop. And the ones protecting you? Mara shook her head. They've got their own problems. Before Elara could ask what that meant, Mara gathered her supplies and left. Elara sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the bandage on her arm. Her mind was racing. Who would want her dead? And why now? She hadn't done anything, hadn't made any enemies, hadn't stepped on anyone's toes. She was just trying to keep her head down and do the work Kael had dumped on her. Unless that was the problem. Maybe someone didn't want her doing the work. Didn't want her building alliances, earning respect, carving out a space for herself in a castle that was supposed to reject her. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she called. Ronan stepped inside, his usual grin replaced by something more serious. I heard what happened. News travels fast. Always does. He crossed the room and sat beside her, his eyes flicking to her bandaged arm. You okay? I'm alive. That's not the same thing. Elara looked at him. Really looked at him. Ronan had been kind to her since the day they met, not because he had to be, not because it benefited him, just because he seemed to actually see her as a person instead of a chess piece. Why are you here? She asked quietly. Because you're the only person in this castle who doesn't treat me like a trained dog, Ronan said. And because I don't trust anyone else to tell you the truth. What truth? Ronan hesitated. Then, there are factions forming. People who don't want the alliance to work. Some of them are human loyalists who think you sold out. Some of them are wolves who think Kael went soft by marrying beneath his station. and some of them are just opportunists who see chaos and want to profit from it. Elara's stomach sank. You think one of them sent the assassin? I think someone sent him, yeah, and I think whoever it was has friends in high places. Lucien. Ronan's expression darkened. Maybe. Lucien's smart. Too smart. He doesn't make moves unless he's sure they'll pay off, but he's also ambitious, and ambition makes people dangerous. So what do I do? You be careful. You watch your back, and you don't trust anyone, including me, more than you have to. Elara smiled despite herself. That's depressing advice. It's survival advice. Ronan stood, his grin returning just a little. And for what it's worth, Elara, I'm glad you're still here. This place would be a lot more boring without you. He left before she could respond. That night, Elara couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying the attack over and over in her mind. The knife, the dead eyes, the way Greaves had torn the man apart like he was nothing. She kept thinking about what Ronan had said. Don't trust anyone. She didn't. Not really. But she also couldn't do this alone. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and got dressed. She slipped out of her room, moving quietly through the dark corridors. The castle was quieter at night. Fewer guards, fewer servants, just the occasional creak of old stone settling. She found herself in the library, a massive room on the third floor that she'd only visited once before. It was warmer than the archives, lined with books that actually looked cared for, and it smelled like leather and wood smoke. A fire burned low in the hearth. Elara pulled a book at random from the shelf, something about the history of the Dominion, and settled into a chair near the fire. She wasn't really reading, just holding the book like a talisman, something solid and real in a world that felt increasingly unsteady. Couldn't sleep either? She jumped, nearly dropping the book. Kyle stood in the doorway, still dressed, his hair damp like he'd just come from outside. Snow dusted his shoulders. I didn't hear you, Elara said. You weren't supposed to. Kale crossed to the fire and stood there, warming his hands. He didn't look at her. You should be resting. I tried. Try harder. Elara closed the book with more force than necessary. Is there something you actually want, or are you just here to give orders? Kale turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, but there was tension in the line of his shoulders, the set of his jaw. I want to know why you went down to the archives alone. Because I needed records. You could have sent someone. I don't trust anyone enough to send them. Kale's eyes narrowed. That's smart, but it's also going to get you killed. Better than sitting in my room like a prisoner. You're not a prisoner. Then what am I? The question hung in the air between them. Kale looked like he wanted to say something. His mouth open, then closed. But whatever it was, he swallowed it down. You're my wife, he said finally. That means something, whether you believe it or not. It means I'm a target, Elara said. That's all. Kale's jaw tightened. I won't let anyone hurt you. Can't promise that. I can try. Elara stared at him. There was something raw in his voice, something almost desperate, and it startled her. This wasn't the cold, distant king who'd rejected her on their wedding night. This was someone else, someone she didn't know. Why now? She asked quietly. Why do you suddenly care? Kale looked away. I don't know. It wasn't an answer, but it was honest. Elara stood, setting the book aside. I'm going back to my room. She walked past him toward the door. As she passed, Kael's hand shot out and caught her wrist, gently, barely holding her. Elara. She stopped but didn't turn around. Don't go anywhere alone, he said. Not until we find out who's behind this. Is that an order? It's a request. Elara pulled her wrist free. I'll think about it. She left him standing there by the fire, and she didn't look back. The next morning, Elara woke to find 2 guards stationed outside her door. Young wolves, both of them stone-faced and silent. When she asked what they were doing, they told her they'd been assigned by the king. For her protection. She didn't argue. She just filed it away as another piece of the puzzle. Over the next few days, things shifted. Subtly at first, then more obviously. Kyle stopped avoiding her. He showed up at meals, sat across from her at the high table, asked questions about her work with the southern villages. He didn't smile. didn't flirt, but he was present in a way he hadn't been before. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it made her more nervous, because the court noticed. And when the court noticed, they started whispering. Elara heard the rumors secondhand, through servants, through Ronan, through the way people looked at her when they thought she wasn't paying attention. Some said Kael was finally warming to his human bride. Others said he was just trying to keep her docile after the assassination attempt. A few, quietly, carefully, suggested that the queen was playing a deeper game than anyone realized. Elara ignored all of it. She had work to do. The southern villages were still a mess. The boundary dispute had escalated into threats of violence. 2 farmers had nearly killed each other over a cow. And the grain shipments were delayed again because one of the river crossings had flooded and no one wanted to pay for repairs. She spent her days in meetings, mediating arguments, signing orders, and trying to keep everything from collapsing into chaos. It was exhausting. But it was also the only thing keeping her sane. Then Ronan invited her to go hunting. "It'll be good for you," he said, leaning against the doorframe of the council chamber like he owned the place. "Get you out of this tomb. Clear your head." Elara looked up from the stack of reports she'd been drowning in. "I don't hunt. Even better, I'll teach you." "Ronan, come on, Elara. When's the last time you did something that wasn't work?" She couldn't remember. "Fine," she said. "But if I shoot you by accident, I'm not apologizing." Ronan grinned. "Deal." They rode out the next morning, just the 2 of them and a pair of Ronan's wolves who kept a respectful distance. The forest beyond the castle was dense, dark, and cold, pines towering overhead, their branches heavy with snow. The air smelled clean, sharp, like ice and earth. Elara had forgotten what silence sounded like. Real silence, without the constant noise of the castle, the arguments, the footsteps, the weight of 100 eyes watching her every move. Out here it was just wind and birds, and the crunch of snow under the horses' hooves. "Better?" Ronan asked. "Yeah," Elara admitted. "Better." They rode deeper into the woods, following game trails that Ronan seemed to know by heart. He pointed out tracks, deer, rabbit, something larger that might have been a bear, and explained how to read them, how to tell fresh from old, how to predict where the animal might go next. Elara listened, absorbing it all. She liked the logic of it, the puzzle. "You're a natural," Ronan said after she correctly identified a set of wolf prints. "I'm good at patterns," Elara said. "That's all." "Still counts." They dismounted near a frozen stream and walked the rest of the way on foot, moving quietly through the trees. Ronan had given her a bow, light, simple, strung with new cord, and showed her how to hold it, how to draw, how to aim. "Don't think," he said, "just feel." Elara tried. She drew the bow, aimed at a tree trunk 20 paces away, and released. The arrow sailed wide, embedding itself in the snow. "Close," Ronan said, grinning. "Liar." "Okay, not close, but you'll get there." They spent the next hour practicing. By the end, Elara could hit the tree more often than not. Her arms ached, her fingers were numb, but she felt lighter, like something inside her had loosened just a little. "Thank you," she said as they packed up. "For what?" "For this, for treating me like a person instead of a problem." Ronan's grin faded into something softer. "Elara, you're not a problem. You're just someone trying to survive in a place that doesn't make it easy. I get that." Before Elara could respond, one of Ronan's wolves came crashing through the trees, his face pale. "Sir," he gasped, "we've got company." Ronan's expression went hard. "Who?" "The king, and he doesn't look happy." Send. Kael appeared through the trees like a storm-given form, mounted on a massive black horse, flanked by Greaves and 3 other wolves. His face was carved from stone, his eyes cold and furious. He dismounted in one smooth motion and stalked toward them. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his gaze locked on Ronan. Ronan held up his hands. "Easy. We were just—" "I know what you were doing," Kael snapped. "Taking her out here alone where anyone could—" "She's not alone," Ronan interrupted. "I'm with her. My wolves are with her. She's safe." "She's not safe. She's a target. Or did you forget someone tried to kill her 3 days ago?" "I didn't forget," Ronan said, his voice hardening. But she's not a prisoner either. She deserves to breathe. Kale's hands clenched into fists. She deserves to stay alive. Stop, Elara said, stepping between them. Both men turned to look at her. Stop talking about me like I'm not standing right here. Kale's jaw tightened. Elara. No. Her voice was sharp, cutting. You don't get to do this. You don't get to ignore me for weeks, treat me like I'm invisible, and then suddenly show up acting like you own me. I'm trying to protect you. No, you're trying to control me, and I'm done with it. Kale stared at her, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. You don't understand what's at stake. Then explain it to me, Elara shot back, because right now, all I see is a man who can't decide if I'm his wife or his burden. The words landed like a slap. Kale's expression shifted, something raw and wounded crossing his face before he locked it down. Get on your horse, he said quietly. We're going back. I'm not finished. Now, Elara. His voice was low, cold, absolute, the voice of a king who expected to be obeyed. Elara held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned to Ronan. Thank you for today, she said. I needed it. Ronan nodded, his expression grim. Elara mounted her horse and rode back toward the castle without another word. Kael followed, close enough that she could feel his presence like a weight on her back. They didn't speak the entire way. When they reached the castle gates, Kael finally broke the silence. Stay away from Ronan. Elara turned to look at him. Excuse me? You heard me. And if I don't? Kael's eyes were cold, empty. Then you'll prove me right about everything. He rode away before she could ask what that meant. Elara stood there in the courtyard, watching him disappear into the castle, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not sadness, not even anger, just a cold, crystalline certainty. If Kyle Draven wanted a war, she'd give him one. She didn't go to her room. Instead, Elara walked straight to the council chamber, pushed open the heavy doors, and found exactly who she was looking for. Lucian Var stood near the window, studying a map spread across the table. He looked up when she entered, one eyebrow rising in that infuriating way he had, like everything was mildly amusing and beneath him at the same time. Lady Voss, he said, to what do I owe the pleasure? I need information, Elara said, closing the door behind her. Lucy Yen's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Information comes at a price. Name it. Dangerous words. He crossed his arms, leaning against the table. What exactly do you want to know? Elara moved closer, keeping her voice level. Who tried to kill me? And why the king suddenly cares enough to shadow my every move? Lucian studied her for a long moment. Those are two very different questions. Then answer the easy one first. There is no easy one. Lucian pushed off the table and walked to the window, his back to her. But I'll give you something for free, since I like you. The man who attacked you in the archives, he wasn't working alone, and whoever hired him has deep pockets and deeper connections. Elara's stomach tightened. You're saying it's someone in the court. I'm saying it's someone who can afford to move pieces without getting caught. That narrows the field considerably. To who? Lucien turned, his cold blue eyes meeting hers. To people who don't want you here. People who see the alliance as weakness. People who profit from instability. That could be anyone. Exactly. Lucian's smile was razor sharp. Which is why you need to be very, very careful who you trust, Lady Voss. Because the next assassin might not be so obvious. Elara held his gaze. And what about the second question? Why does Kael suddenly care? Lucien's expression shifted, something almost like pity flickering across his face. That one? You'll have to ask him yourself, though I suspect you won't like the answer. Try me. Jealousy makes fools of even the strongest men, Lucian said quietly. And your king? He's been a fool for a long time. He's just starting to realize it. Before Elara could respond, the door burst open. Greaves stood there, his face grim. We need you, he said, looking at Lucian. Now, there's been an incident at the northern border. Lucian straightened immediately. What kind of incident? The violent kind. 3 villages burned, 60 dead, maybe more. The room went cold. Who? Lucian demanded. We don't know yet. Could be raiders, could be worse. Greaves glanced at Elara, then back to Lucien. The king wants a full assessment within the hour. Lucien grabbed his coat from the back of a chair and headed for the door. He paused beside Elara, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Watch your back, Lady Voss. Things are about to get worse. Then he was gone, and Elara was left standing alone in the council chamber, her heart pounding. The castle descended into controlled chaos. Soldiers mobilized. Messengers rode out in every direction. The council convened 3 times in as many hours, each meeting more tense than the last. Elara stayed out of the way, but she listened. Eavesdropped, really, using the network of servants she'd quietly cultivated over the past weeks. What she learned made her blood run cold. The attacks weren't random. They were coordinated, strategic. Someone had hit 3 villages simultaneously, all of them border settlements, all of them human majority, all of them aligned with the Alliance. The message was clear. The peace Kael had brokered was fragile, breakable, and someone wanted to break it. Worse, the rumors were already starting. Whispers that the attacks were retaliation for Kael's marriage, that the human queen had brought a curse on the Dominion, that wolves were dying because their king had gone soft. Elara heard it all and said nothing, but inside something was building, a cold, furious determination. She found Ronan in the barracks, helping organize supply lines for the soldiers heading north. He looked up when she approached, his expression cautious. Elara, you shouldn't be here. I need your help, she said. Ronan glanced around, then pulled her aside into a quieter corner. With what? I want to go north, see the damage myself, talk to the survivors. Ronan's eyes widened. Are you insane? Kael will lose his mind. Kael doesn't get a vote. Elara, listen to me. Her voice was sharp, urgent. Right now, everyone's saying I'm the reason this happened, that the Alliance was a mistake, that marrying me brought violence to the Dominion. If I stay here, locked away in this castle, those rumors become fact. But if I go, if I show them that I'm not hiding, that I'm willing to stand with the people who are suffering, maybe I can turn this around. Ronan shook his head. Or you'll get yourself killed. Maybe, but doing nothing is killing me anyway. Ronan studied her face, and whatever he saw there made him sigh. You're serious about this? Completely. Then you're going to need more than good intentions. He rubbed his face, thinking. I can get you transport, a small escort, but we'll have to move fast before Kael finds out. When? Tonight, before dawn. Ronan's expression was grim. And Elara? If this goes wrong, I'm not taking the blame. Fair enough. They left it at that. Elara spent the rest of the day preparing. She packed light, practical clothes, sturdy boots, a knife she'd borrowed from one of the maids who owed her a favor. She wrote a letter to Kael, explaining where she'd gone and why, though she doubted he'd care about her reasons. She just wanted him to know this wasn't running away. This was running toward. At midnight, she slipped out of her room. The guards Kael had posted were gone, probably reassigned to more important duties now that the northern crisis had everyone's attention. She made it to the stables without being stopped. Ronan was already there, along with 4 wolves she recognized from his personal guard. They had horses ready, saddled and packed. Last chance to change your mind, Ronan said. Elara swung herself into the saddle. Let's go. They rode out through the eastern gate, the one used for supply wagons, where the guards were more interested in checking cargo than faces. By the time anyone realized the queen was missing, they'd be miles away. The ride north was brutal. They pushed hard, stopping only to water the horses and grab a few hours of sleep in shifts. The landscape changed as they traveled, the dense forest giving way to rolling hills, then flat plains scarred by fire and ash. When they reached the first burned village, Elara's stomach turned. The settlement was gone, just charred skeletons of buildings, blackened earth, and the smell of death hanging thick in the air. Survivors huddled in makeshift camps at the edge of the destruction, maybe 20 people, mostly women and children, wrapped in blankets and staring at nothing. Elara dismounted and walked into the camp. The survivors watched her approach with hollow eyes. One woman, older, her face streaked with soot, stood up. Who are you? The woman asked. Her voice was raw, broken. My name is Elara Voss, Elara said. I'm the queen. The woman laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. The queen, right. Come to see what your marriage cost us? Elara flinched but didn't look away. I came to help. Help? The woman's voice rose. My husband is dead. My sons are dead. Our homes are ash. What kind of help do you think you can give us? I don't know yet, Elara said honestly, but I'm here, and I'm listening. The woman stared at her. Then, slowly, she sat back down. You want to listen? Fine. Listen to this. We were loyal. We supported the alliance. We believed the king when he said marrying a human would bring peace. And what did we get? Slaughter. Our homes burned while we slept. Our families torn apart. That's what your peace looks like. Elara's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring them back. No, it doesn't. Elara knelt down, meeting the woman's eyes. But I swear to you, I will find out who did this, and I will make sure they pay. The woman studied her face for a long moment. You mean that? Yes? Then you're braver than I thought, or stupider. The woman's expression softened just a little. We need food, medicine, shelter. Winter's coming, and we've got nothing. I'll make sure you get it, Elara said. She stood turning to Ronan. Send word back to the castle. I want emergency supplies dispatched immediately. Food, blankets, medical kits, everything they need. Ronan nodded and gestured to one of his wolves, who mounted up and rode south. Elara spent the rest of the day moving through the camp, talking to survivors, taking notes, making promises she wasn't sure she could keep. By nightfall, she was exhausted, physically and emotionally wrung out, but she kept going. That's when she heard the horses. A dozen riders appeared on the horizon, moving fast. Elara's hand went to the knife at her belt, but Ronan grabbed her arm. Wait, he said. Those are Dominion colors. The riders came closer. Elara's heart sank when she saw who led them. Kyle. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. He stalked toward Elara, and for a moment she thought he might actually strike her. What the hell were you thinking? He demanded. I was thinking someone needed to be here, Elara said, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. You could have been killed. I'm still alive. Barely. Kale's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Do you have any idea what you've done? Riding into a war zone without protection, without authorization? I don't need your authorization, Elara interrupted. I'm not your prisoner. You're my wife. In name only. You made that clear. Kale's expression twisted into something raw and dangerous. You don't get to throw that back at me. Not now. Why not? It's the truth. Because things have changed, Kale snarled. Because, whether you believe it or not, He stopped abruptly, his jaw working. We're leaving. Now. I'm not finished here. Yes, you are. Elara stepped closer, her voice dropping to something cold and sharp. You can order me back to the castle. You can lock me in that room and post guards at the door. But you can't make me stop caring about these people. You can't make me invisible. And you can't make me stop trying to fix what's broken. Kale stared at her, his chest heaving. For a moment she saw something crack in his expression, something vulnerable and almost desperate. Then Greaves appeared at his shoulder. Your Majesty, we've got scouts reporting movement to the east. Multiple riders. Could be the raiders circling back. Kale's attention snapped away from Elara. How many? 20, maybe 30. Get everyone mounted. We're pulling back to the secondary camp. What about the survivors? Elara demanded. We'll send reinforcements to evacuate them, Kyle said. But right now, we need to move. He grabbed Elara's arm, not gently, and pulled her toward the horses. She yanked free. I'm not leaving them. Elara, I said I'm not leaving them. Kale's eyes blazed. If you stay, you die. Is that what you want? If I leave, they die. So yes, I'm staying. For a long moment they stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Then Kale turned to Ronan. Take 10 men and escort the survivors south, fast as you can. I'll hold the raiders here. Your Majesty, that's an order. Ronan hesitated, then nodded, He started barking commands, organizing the evacuation. Elara watched, her heart pounding. "Thank you," she said quietly to Kael. He didn't look at her. "Don't thank me yet. We might all be dead in an hour." They weren't dead in an hour, but it was close. The raiders hit just as Ronan's group disappeared over the southern ridge. They came fast, howling war cries, torches blazing in the darkness. Kael's wolves formed a defensive line, shifting into their half-forms, massive, snarling creatures that were more beast than man. Elara had never seen a real battle before. She'd read about them, heard stories, but nothing prepared her for the reality. The noise, the blood. The way bodies hit the ground and didn't get back up. She stayed behind the line, knife in hand, trying not to panic. Kael fought like something out of a nightmare, fast, brutal, relentless. He tore through raiders like they were made of paper, his claws slick with blood, his eyes glowing that terrible amber. But there were too many. For every raider that fell, two more appeared. The line started to buckle. "Fall back," Kael roared. "To the trees!" They retreated into the forest, using the terrain to slow the raiders down. Elara ran with them, her lungs burning, her legs screaming. An arrow whistled past her head. Another hit a tree inches from her face. Then she tripped. She went down hard, her ankle twisting, pain shooting up her leg. She tried to stand and collapsed again. The raiders were getting closer. She could hear them crashing through the underbrush. A shadow fell over her. She looked up and saw a raider standing above her, sword raised. Then Kael was there. He hit the raider with enough force to snap bone, sending the man flying into a tree. He scooped Elara up in one motion, cradling her against his chest, and ran. "Hold on," he growled. Elara wrapped her arms around his neck and held on. They burst out of the forest into a clearing where Greaves and the remaining wolves were making a final stand. Kael set Elara down behind a fallen log, his eyes wild. "Stay here," he said. "Don't move." Then he was gone, back into the fight. Elara pressed herself against the log, knife clutched in her trembling hands, and watched the battle rage. It felt like hours. It was probably minutes. When the last raider finally fell, the clearing was silent except for heavy breathing and the crackle of dying torches. Kael stood in the center of it all, covered in blood that wasn't his chest heaving. He looked around, counting his wolves. 3 were dead, 2 more badly wounded. His eyes found Elara. He crossed the clearing in long strides, dropped to his knees in front of her and grabbed her face with both hands. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, desperate. "My ankle," Elara managed. "I think it's sprained." Kael's hands moved to her leg, checking the injury with surprising gentleness. "You'll live. So will you." He looked up at her, and Elara saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. Raw, unfiltered fear. "When I saw you fall," he said quietly, "I thought—" He didn't finish. He just pulled her against him, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She felt his heart hammering against her chest, felt the tremor in his hands. "Kael," she whispered. He pulled back just enough to look at her, and then, before she could process what was happening, he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, almost violent, like he was trying to prove she was real, that she was alive. Elara froze for half a second, then kissed him back just as hard. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I can't lose you," Kael said, his voice breaking. "I can't." Before Elara could respond, Greaves appeared beside them. "Your Majesty, we need to move. More riders are coming." Kael stood, pulling Elara up with him. "Can you ride?" "I'll manage." They mounted up and rode south, pushing the exhausted horses as hard as they dared. Behind them, the forest burned. They reached the secondary camp as dawn broke, a fortified outpost built into the hillside with stone walls and armed guards. Ronan was there, along with the survivors. When he saw them ride in, bloodied and battered, his face went pale. "What happened?" "Later," Kael said. He dismounted and lifted Elara down carefully. "Get the healer, now." The healer, a different one this time, younger, examined Elara's ankle and wrapped it tightly. Nothing broken, just badly sprained. She'd be limping for a week. Kael stood nearby, watching. He hadn't said a word since they'd arrived. hadn't looked away from her. When the healer left, Elara finally spoke. "We need to talk." "I know." "That kiss was a mistake," Kyle said quickly, too quickly. Elara's chest tightened. "Right, of course." "No." Kale ran a hand through his hair, frustration clear on his face. "That came out wrong. I meant—" He stopped, struggling with the words. "I meant I shouldn't have done it like that in the middle of a battlefield. When you were hurt and scared, and I wasn't scared," Elara lied. Kyle's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Liar." "Fine. I was terrified. Happy?" "No." Kale moved closer, and Elara's breath caught. "I'm not happy. I haven't been happy since the day I married you and then pushed you away like a coward." Elara stared at him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I was wrong," Kyle said, his voice low and raw. "About everything. About you. About what this marriage was supposed to be. I told myself it was just politics, just a treaty, just a necessary evil. But then you showed up and refused to break, refused to hide, refused to be anything less than exactly who you are. And somewhere along the way, He stopped, his jaw working. "You what?" Elara pressed. Kyle looked at her and she saw everything in his eyes, the fear, the regret, the truth he'd been fighting. "I fell in love with you," he said, "and I don't know what to do about it." The words hit Elara like a physical blow. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You're lying," she finally said. "I'm not. You said your heart belonged to someone else." "I was wrong about that too." Kale's voice was rough. "I thought I was still in love with her, with who she used to be. But I wasn't. I was just holding on to something safe, something that didn't ask anything of me. And then you came along and asked for everything." Elara's eyes stung. "I don't believe you. I know, I don't deserve for you to believe me, but it's the truth." Before Elara could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Shouting, the clang of steel. Kale's head snapped toward the door. Greaves burst in, his face grim. "We've got a problem. Lucien just arrested Captain Hale." Kale went very still. "On what charges?" "Treason? Conspiracy? Aiding the enemy." Greaves glanced at Elara. "He's claiming Ronan helped orchestrate the attacks, that he's been feeding information to the raiders." Elara's blood went cold. "That's insane. Ronan would never—" "I know," Kale said. "Which means someone's setting him up." "Lucien," Elara said. Kale's eyes were hard. "Maybe. Or someone using Lucien." He turned to Greaves. "Where is he now?" "In the holding cells. Lucien's already started interrogation." Kyle swore viciously. "Get me a horse. We're going back. Now." "Your Majesty, with respect, you just survived an ambush. You need rest." "I said now, Greaves." They rode hard for the castle, arriving just after noon. Kale went straight to the dungeons, Elara limping behind him despite his protests. The cells were deep below the main castle, carved into solid rock. Damp, cold, lit by flickering torches that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Ronan was in the far cell, chained to the wall. His face was bruised, blood crusting his split lip. Lucien stood outside the bars, arms crossed, watching. "Your Majesty," Lucien said smoothly, "I was about to send for you." Kale ignored him. "Open the cell." "I'm afraid I can't do that. Captain Hale is under arrest for—" "I know what he's under arrest for," Kale snapped. "And I'm ordering you to release him." Lucien's expression didn't change. "I answer to the crown, Your Majesty, and the evidence against him is compelling." "But what evidence?" Lucien pulled a folded paper from his coat and handed it to Kale. "A letter, found in his quarters, detailing troop movements, supply routes, village locations, everything the raiders needed to coordinate their attacks." Kale read the letter, his face darkening. Elara moved closer, reading over his shoulder. The handwriting was neat, precise, but something about it felt wrong. "This is a fake," she said. Lucien raised an eyebrow. "You're certain?" "Yes. Ronan doesn't write like that. His handwriting is terrible. I've seen his reports." "Forgive me, Lady Voss, but your opinion hardly constitutes evidence." Then test it, Elara said. Get samples of his handwriting. Compare them. You'll see I'm right. Lucian smiled, cold, sharp. An admirable suggestion. But even if the letter is forged, there's still the matter of his movements. Captain Hale has been absent from the castle frequently over the past month, always with convenient excuses. Always just before attacks occurred. Because he was helping me, Elara said. He was my escort, my friend. He had nothing to do with this. Perhaps. Or perhaps he saw an opportunity to use you as cover. Lucien's gaze shifted to Kael. The question, Your Majesty, is whether you're willing to risk the Dominion's security on your wife's intuition. Kael's jaw tightened. He looked at Ronan, then at Elara, then back at Lucien. Release him, Kael said finally. But he stays under guard, confined to quarters until we sort this out. Lucien inclined his head. As you wish. The cell door swung open. Ronan stumbled out and Elara caught him. Are you all right? She asked. Been better. Ronan's voice was rough, but his eyes were clear. Thanks. Both of you. Don't thank us yet, Kael said grimly. Someone wants you dead or disgraced. Until we figure out who, you're not safe. They left the dungeons, guards flanking Ronan as they escorted him to his quarters. Elara walked beside Kael, her mind racing. This doesn't make sense, she said quietly. Why frame Ronan? He's loyal, everyone knows it. Maybe that's exactly why, Kael said. Take out someone people trust, and you create doubt. Paranoia. It's a smart move if your goal is destabilization. Then who benefits? Kael's expression was grim. That's what we need to find out. But before they could continue, a servant appeared, breathless. Your Majesty, Lady Voss, there's been an incident in your chambers. Elara's blood went cold. What kind of incident? You need to see for yourselves. They ran, or in Elara's case, hobbled as fast as she could with her bad ankle. When they reached the royal wing, guards were already swarming. Kael pushed through to Elara's chambers and stopped dead. The room was destroyed, furniture overturned, tapestries slashed, and on the wall above the bed, written in what looked like blood, "The human dies tonight." Elara stared at the words, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Kael's hand closed around hers, warm and solid. You're not sleeping here, he said. His voice was steel. You're staying with me, in my quarters, where I can protect you. Elara turned to look at him. His face was set, determined, and for the first time since she'd arrived in this brutal, frozen place, she didn't argue. Okay, she said quietly, because whoever was behind this, whoever wanted her dead, they were getting bolder. And if she was going to survive, she needed to stop fighting alone. Isle's quarters were nothing like Elara expected. She'd imagined something cold, austere, all stone and steel and empty spaces. Instead, the rooms were warm, not soft exactly, but lived in. Books piled on tables, maps tacked to walls. A worn leather chair near the fireplace that looked like it had been sat in 1,000 times. The bed was massive, draped in dark furs, but there was a smaller alcove off to the side with a second narrower bed. You can take the main room, Kael said, not meeting her eyes. I'll sleep in the anteroom. Elara looked at him, at the tension in his shoulders, the careful distance he was maintaining. You don't have to... Yes, I do. His voice was flat. Someone wants you dead, Elara. Until we figure out who, I'm not taking chances. This is the most defensible position in the castle. Guards I trust are posted at every entrance. You'll be safe here. And you? I'll be fine. That's not what I asked. Kael finally looked at her. His eyes were tired, haunted. I'll be better knowing you're alive. Before Elara could respond, Greaves appeared in the doorway. Your Majesty, Chancellor Oren is requesting an emergency council meeting. He says it can't wait. Kael's jaw tightened. Of course it can't. He turned to Elara. Stay here. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me or Greaves. Kael, please. The raw desperation in his voice made her nod. All right. He left with Greaves, and Elara was alone. She locked the door as instructed, then limped to the window. The sun was setting, painting the courtyard below in shades of blood and gold. Guards moved in tight patrols. Servants hurried between buildings, heads down. The castle felt like it was holding its breath. Elara turned away from the window and started exploring. Not snooping, exactly, just looking, trying to understand the man who'd married her, rejected her, and now claimed to love her. The books were mostly military strategy and history, a few works of philosophy, one battered collection of poetry shoved behind everything else, like he didn't want anyone to know it was there. Elara pulled it out, flipped through the pages. Annotations in the margins, passages underlined. This had been read, often. She set it back carefully. On the desk, half buried under maps, was a small leather journal. Elara hesitated, then picked it up. The first entry was dated 3 years ago. She started reading. Most of it was mundane, notes on troop movements, supply issues, political maneuvering, but scattered throughout were entries that were more personal. Raw. She's gone. Truly gone this time. I thought if I held on long enough, if I proved myself worthy enough, she'd come back. But she won't. She can't. She's married to the Eastern Alpha now, and I need to accept that my heart is a dead thing. Elara's throat tightened. She flipped forward. The human delegation arrives tomorrow. Father insists on the alliance. Says it's necessary. I know he's right, but the thought of binding myself to someone I don't know, don't love, feels like a final defeat. Like admitting she won. Further still. Her name is Elara. She's smaller than I expected, quieter. She looked at me like she was trying to decide if I was dangerous or just pathetic. Probably both. I told her this marriage would be political. Nothing more. The lie tasted like ash. Elara closed the journal with shaking hands. She shouldn't have read it, but now that she had, she couldn't unknow what it said. Kyle hadn't rejected her because he didn't want her. He'd rejected her because he was broken, because he thought love was something that had already destroyed him once, and he couldn't survive it happening again. She set the journal back where she'd found it and sank into the worn leather chair. Her ankle throbbed, her head ached, and somewhere deep in her chest, something that had been frozen since her wedding night started to thaw. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. She must have dozed off, because when the door opened, it was full dark outside, and Kyle was standing in the doorway, backlit by corridor torches. "You're supposed to lock the door," he said. "I did lock it. And yet I walked right in." Elara blinked, then remembered. "You have a key. It's my room." "Right." She rubbed her eyes, trying to shake off the grogginess. "How was the meeting?" "Disaster." Kale closed the door behind him and locked it. Actually locked it this time, with a heavy bolt that looked like it could stop a battering ram. "Oren wants to suspend the alliance, pull back all support from the human territories. He's claiming the attacks proved the marriage was a mistake." Elara's stomach dropped. "What did you say?" "I told him he could take his suspension and shove it up his—" Kale stopped, grimacing. "I told him no. The alliance stands. Even if it costs you?" "Especially if it costs me." Kyle moved to the side table and poured 2 glasses of something amber and sharp-smelling. He handed one to Elara. "But I'm running out of allies. Oren's not alone. Half the council agrees with him. They're saying I've gone soft, that I'm prioritizing a human over the Dominion." "Are you?" Kyle looked at her, really looked at her. "Yes." The word hung in the air between them. Elara took a sip of the drink. It burned going down. "Then you're an idiot." "Probably." "Definitely." She set the glass aside. "Kyle, if the council turns against you, if your own people think you're weak, then they're wrong." His voice was hard. "Strength isn't just conquest and domination. It's knowing when to hold ground and when to build bridges. It's choosing the harder path because it's the right one." "That's not what they believe." "I know, which is why we need to prove them wrong." Elara frowned. "How?" Kale pulled a chair over and sat across from her, close enough that their knees almost touched. "By finding out who's behind the attacks, who's framing Ronan, who left that message in your room. Once we expose them, the narrative changes. It stops being about whether the alliance was a mistake and starts being about who's trying to destroy it." "And you think you can find them?" "No." Kale's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I think we can find them. You're smarter than half my council combined, Elara. You see patterns they miss, connections they ignore. If anyone can untangle this mess, it's you." Elara stared at him. You're serious. Completely. I'm not a soldier. I'm not a spy. You're the woman who walked into a war zone to help people everyone else had written off, Kyle interrupted. You're the woman who refused to break even when I gave you every reason to. You're stronger than you know, Elara, and I need that strength now. She wanted to argue, to point out all the ways this could go wrong, but the truth was she wanted this. Wanted to stop being a victim, a target, a piece on someone else's board. She wanted to fight back. All right, she said. Where do we start? Kale's eyes gleamed. We start by looking at who benefits. The attacks hit human villages, which destabilizes the alliance. Ronan gets framed, which removes a powerful voice supporting the marriage. Your room gets vandalized, which creates fear and chaos. Someone's orchestrating this. Someone with access, resources, and motivation. Lucien. Maybe. But Lucien's too obvious, too convenient. Kael leaned back, thinking, what if he's just a tool, someone else's weapon? Then who's wielding him? That's what we need to find out. They spent the next hour going through everything, every attack, every incident, every strange coincidence. Kael had files, reports, witness statements. Elara had her notes from the southern villages, her conversations with survivors, the patterns she'd noticed in the supply disruptions. Slowly, a picture started to form. Look at this, Elara said, spreading a map across the table. The villages that were attacked, they're all on major trade routes that connect human territories to wolflands. If those routes are too dangerous to use, trade stops. And if trade stops, the alliance loses its economic foundation, Kael finished. His eyes were sharp now, focused. Someone's trying to make the alliance unprofitable. Who profits from that? Merchants with alternative routes, nobles with competing interests. Anyone who was making money before the alliance and losing it now. Kael pulled over a list of names. We need to cross-reference this against the council members pushing for suspension. They worked through the night. Guards changed shifts outside the door. The fire burned low and was rebuilt. Elara's ankle stopped hurting, or maybe she just stopped noticing. As dawn broke, they had 3 names. Lord Garrett Vane, a minor noble with extensive holdings in the Eastern Territories, areas that had been bypassed when new trade routes opened through the Alliance lands. Baroness Mira Torvin, a wolf-born aristocrat who'd been vocal about human weakness and had lost a lucrative timber contract to a human merchant shortly after the alliance was signed, and Chancellor Oren himself, who despite his position had family ties to the old guard that had opposed Kael's ascension to the throne. Any one of them could be behind this, Kael said, or all of them working together. How do we prove it? We need evidence, something concrete. Kael rubbed his face, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. But if we go after them directly, they'll cover their tracks. We need them to make a mistake. Elara's mind was racing. Then slowly, an idea formed. Dangerous, reckless, possibly brilliant. What if we give them a target they can't resist? Kael looked at her. What do you mean? Me. Elara stood, pacing despite her limp. They want me dead. They've tried twice and failed. What if we make it look like they're about to succeed? Absolutely not. Listen. Elara turned to face him. We stage an attack. Make it look like I'm vulnerable, isolated. They take the bait, we catch them in the act, and we have our proof. No. Kael stood as well, his voice flat and absolute. I'm not using you as bait. You said you needed my help. Not like this. Not by putting you in danger. I'm already in danger, Elara shot back. At least this way we control it. The answer is no. It's not your decision. Kael's eyes blazed. Like hell it's not. You're my wife. My responsibility. I'm not yours to let or not let, Elara interrupted, her voice sharp. I'm my own person, Kael. And I'm telling you this is the best option we have. They stood there, locked in another battle of wills. The room was silent except for their breathing. Finally, Kael spoke, his voice low and dangerous. If I agree to this, and that's a massive if, we do it my way. My guards. My plan. You don't make a move without my approval. Fine. And if it goes wrong, if, for 1 second I think you're in real danger, I pull you out. No arguments. Agreed. Kyle stared at her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. You're insane. I learned from the best. That's not a compliment. I know. That's him. They spent the next 2 days planning. Kale brought in Greaves and two other wolves he trusted absolutely. A woman named Sarah, who ran intelligence for the northern packs, and a grizzled old warrior named Marcus, who'd served 3 Alpha Kings and survived them all. The plan was simple, which made it both elegant and terrifying. Elara would attend a public ceremony in the lower town, a dedication of a new well that had been funded by Alliance resources. She'd be visible, surrounded by people, but her guard detail would be deliberately light. Just visible enough to look real, but thin enough to look vulnerable. Kael and the others would be hidden nearby, watching, waiting. If someone made a move, they'd catch them. You'll be wearing this, Sarah said, handing Elara a thin chain. A small pendant hung from it, delicate, decorative. It's a tracker. If something goes wrong, we'll know exactly where you are. Elara put it on. The metal was warm against her skin. And this, Marcus added, pressing a knife into her hand, smaller than the one she'd been carrying, but wickedly sharp. If someone gets past us, which they won't, you put this in their gut and run. Don't try to be a hero. Wasn't planning on it, Elara said. Kael was quiet through all of this, his expression unreadable. When the others left to finalize positions, he stayed behind. Last chance to back out, he said. I'm not backing out. I know. He moved closer, and Elara's breath caught. But I need you to understand something. If you get hurt, if anything happens to you because of this plan, I won't forgive myself. That's not your burden to carry. Yes, it is. Kael's hand came up, cupping her face. Because I love you, Elara. I know I have no right to say that. I know I've done nothing to earn it. But it's the truth. And I need you to know it before we do this. Elara's heart was pounding. Kael, you don't have to say anything. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even asking you to feel the same way. I just need you to know that if this goes wrong, it's not because I didn't care. It's because I cared too much and lost you anyway. Elara reached up, covering his hand with hers. You're not going to lose me. You can't promise that. Watch me. She stood on her toes and kissed him. Not desperate this time, not frantic, just steady, sure. A promise made with contact instead of words. When they broke apart, Kael rested his forehead against hers. Don't die on me, he whispered. Don't plan to, she whispered back. The ceremony was at noon. Elara dressed carefully. Simple clothes, nothing too ornate. She wanted to look approachable, harmless. The well was in the lower town, a poor district that had been hit hard by the recent violence. The crowd was small but genuine. Families, workers, people who actually cared about clean water and didn't give a damn about court politics. Elara stood beside the mayor, a nervous human woman who kept wringing her hands. When it was time, Elara gave a short speech. She talked about resilience, about communities coming together, about the alliance being stronger than the forces trying to tear it apart. She didn't mention that she might die in the next hour. The crowd applauded politely. The mayor said a few words, then everyone lined up to take the first drink from the new well, laughing and chatting like this was just another day. Elara scanned the area. Her guard detail was visible, 4 wolves stationed at obvious points. But she knew there were at least a dozen more hidden in buildings, on rooftops, in alleys. Kael was somewhere close. She could feel it. An hour passed. Nothing happened. 2 hours. The crowd started to disperse. Children ran off to play. Adults drifted back to work. Elara was starting to think the plan had failed when she saw him. A man in the crowd. Human. Nondescript. But he was watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. When their eyes met, he smiled. Then he moved. Fast. Too fast. He crossed the square in seconds, hand reaching into his coat. Elara saw the glint of steel and knew what was coming. She dove sideways just as the knife left his hand. It whistled past her head and embedded itself in the well with a thunk. Guards swarmed. The man ran, cutting through the panicking crowd. Elara scrambled to her feet and saw him heading for a narrow alley. Without thinking, she ran after him. Elara, no! Kael's voice somewhere behind her. But she was already moving. The alley was dark, cramped. The man was fast, but Elara was desperate. She followed, her heart hammering, the knife Marcus gave her clutched in her hand. The alley opened into a small courtyard. The man spun to face her, breathing hard. He had another knife. "You should have stayed in your castle, little queen," he said. "Who sent you?" Elara demanded. He laughed. "Someone who pays better than your broken king." He lunged. Elara dodged, barely, and slashed with her own knife. She caught his arm, drawing blood. He cursed and grabbed her, slamming her against the wall. Her head cracked against stone. Pain exploded through her skull. Then Kael was there. He hit the man with enough force to lift him off his feet. They went down in a tangle of limbs and fury. The man didn't stand a chance. In seconds, Kael had him pinned, claws at his throat. "Who sent you?" Kael snarled. The man spat blood. "Go to hell!" Kael's claws pressed harder. "Wrong answer." "It doesn't matter," the man gasped. "You're already dead, both of you. The game's bigger than you know." Greaves appeared with reinforcements. They hauled the man to his feet and dragged him away. Kael turned to Elara, his eyes wild. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." "You ran after him. You could have been killed." "But I wasn't." Kael grabbed her shoulders, not gently. "Don't ever do that again." "I did what I had to." "You nearly gave me a heart attack." "Good," Elara said. "Now you know how I've felt for weeks." Despite everything, the danger, the chaos, the blood, Kael laughed. "You're impossible." "I know." The interrogation took 3 days. The assassin didn't want to talk. But Lucien, for all his faults, was very good at his job. In the end, the man broke. And what he revealed changed everything. It wasn't Lucien. It wasn't Oren. It wasn't any of the nobles they'd suspected. It was Baroness Torvin. But she hadn't been working alone. She'd been part of a larger conspiracy. A network of wolves and humans who wanted the alliance to fail because they feared what it represented. Change. Evolution. A world where the old hierarchies didn't matter anymore. They'd funded the raids, framed Ronan, orchestrated the attacks, and they'd been planning something worse, something final. "There's a shipment of poison coming through the southern border," the assassin said, his voice hoarse from screaming. "Enough to wipe out the entire castle. They're going to put it in the water supply during the winter feast." Kael went very still. "When?" 3 days. 3 days. Just enough time to stop it if they moved fast. Kael turned to Greaves. "Send riders. Intercept that shipment. I want every conspirator in chains by morning." "And the Baroness?" "I'll deal with her personally." They found Baroness Torvin in her estate, packing. She'd heard about the assassin's capture and was trying to run. She didn't get far. Kael arrested her himself, in front of her entire household. She screamed about injustice, about kangaroo courts, about how the alliance had ruined everything. No one listened. The trial was swift, public, brutal in its efficiency. Torvin and her co-conspirators were found guilty of treason, conspiracy, and attempted regicide. The punishment was exile, permanent, to the wastelands beyond the northern border where winter never ended and survival was unlikely. Some called it mercy. Kael called it justice. Elara called it necessary. The poisoned shipment was intercepted. The water supply was guarded. The winter feast went ahead as planned, but this time it felt different. This time, when Kael stood before the assembled court and raised a glass to the alliance, to the queen, to the future they were building together, the hall erupted in genuine cheers. Not everyone was happy, not everyone believed, but enough did. And that was a start. The night after the feast, Elara found Kael on the battlements, staring out at the snow-covered landscape beyond the castle walls. "You should be inside," he said without turning around. "It's freezing up here." "So are you." "I'm used to it." Elara moved to stand beside him. The wind cut through her cloak, sharp and cold. "We did it." "You did it," Kael corrected. "None of this would have worked without you." "That's not true." "It is." He finally looked at her. "You were right, Elara, about all of it. About standing up instead of hiding, about fighting back, about refusing to break. I learned that from you." "No, you knew it already. I just stopped getting in your way. They stood there in silence for a moment, watching their breath fog in the cold air. Then Kael spoke again, his voice quiet. I meant what I said, about loving you. I know it doesn't change what I did, how I hurt you, but it's true. Elara turned to face him fully. I read your journal. Kael blinked. What? The first night, in your quarters. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. But I did. Oh. He looked away, jaw tight. Then you know what a mess I am. I know you're human, Elara said. Well, humanish. I know you've been hurt. I know you were scared. And I know you pushed me away because you thought it would protect us both. It didn't. No, it made things worse. Elara reached out, taking his hand. But I understand why you did it. And Kael, I forgive you. Thick. His eyes snapped to hers, wide with something that looked like hope. You do? I do. She smiled. I'm still angry. I'm still hurt. But I also know that what we have now, this partnership, this team, it's real. And it's worth fighting for. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you too, you idiot. Even though you're stubborn and emotionally constipated and terrible at communication. Kael's mouth fell open. Then, slowly, he started to laugh. That's the worst declaration of love I've ever heard. You want better? Do better. Challenge accepted. He pulled her close and kissed her. This time there was no desperation, no fear, just warmth and certainty and the promise of something real. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. So what now? Elara asked. Now? Kael tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Now we build. Together. A kingdom that's stronger than the sum of its parts. A partnership that can weather anything. Sounds exhausting. Probably. I'm in. Kael's smile widened. Good. Because I'm not letting you go. Not ever. That's very possessive. You like it. Maybe a little. They stood there on the battlements, wrapped in each other and the cold, watching the sun rise over a kingdom that was finally truly theirs. And for the first time since her wedding day, Elara felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Hope was a fragile thing. Elara learned that over the next few weeks as winter tightened its grip on the Dominion. The conspiracy had been exposed, the traitors exiled, but the damage lingered like frost that wouldn't thaw. The southern villages were still struggling. Supply lines remained disrupted. Trust, once shattered, didn't rebuild itself overnight just because the threat had been eliminated. And then there was Ronan. He'd been cleared of all charges, officially, but the accusation had left a stain. People whispered, wondered. Some still believed he'd been involved, that Kael had simply chosen loyalty over justice. Elara found him in the training yard 3 weeks after the trial, working through sword drills with an intensity that bordered on violence. She watched from the sidelines as he moved, fast, brutal, taking out his frustration on the practice dummy until it was nothing but splinters and straw. When he finally stopped, chest heaving, she stepped forward. You're going to break something if you keep that up, she said. Ronan turned, sweat dripping down his face. Maybe that's the point. Destroying training equipment won't fix what happened. No. But it feels better than sitting around pretending everything's fine. He drove his sword into the ground and leaned on it. They still think I did it, Elara. Half the court, most of the guard. They look at me like I'm a traitor who got lucky. Then prove them wrong. How? By smiling and nodding while they whisper behind my back? Elara moved closer, her voice dropping. By doing what you've always done. Being loyal, being honest, being the kind of man who rides into danger to protect someone who needed protecting. Ronan's expression softened. You mean you? I mean anyone who needs it. She paused. But yes, me too. He was quiet for a moment, then pulled his sword from the ground and sheathed it. You know what the worst part is? I actually understand why they suspected me. The evidence looked real. The timing made sense. If I were them, I'd have suspected me too. That doesn't make it fair. No, but it makes it understandable. Ronan managed a weak smile. I'll survive. Always do. Just might take a while to stop being angry about it. Take all the time you need. We're not going anywhere. We? Me and Kael. The Alliance. This whole ridiculous thing we're building. Ronan's smile turned genuine. Speaking of which, I heard a rumor. Something about the king actually sleeping in his own quarters now. With the queen. Elara felt her face heat. That's none of your business. That's a yes. Ronan laughed, and it was the first real laugh she'd heard from him in weeks. Good. You two deserve something good after all this chaos. Before Elara could respond, a young messenger came running across the yard, breathless. Lady Voss, the king needs you. Emergency council meeting. It's about the northern border. Elara's stomach dropped. What happened? I don't know, but they're saying it's bad. The council chamber was packed when Elara arrived. Not just the usual members, but military commanders, regional governors, even a few foreign envoys she didn't recognize. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Kale stood at the head of the table, his face carved from stone. When he saw Elara enter, something in his expression eased fractionally. Tell her, he said to Sarah, the intelligence officer. Sarah looked grim. We've had reports coming in all morning. The northern territories, the ones beyond our border, in the wasteland, they're mobilizing. Someone's been organizing the exiled clans, building an army. Elara's blood went cold. How big? At least 5,000, maybe more, and they're moving south. 5,000, against a dominion that was still recovering from internal strife that had just lost a significant portion of its resources fighting conspirators from within. When will they reach the border? Kyle asked. 2 weeks, maybe less if they push hard. The room erupted in argument. Half the council wanted to fortify the border and wait. The other half wanted to ride out and meet the threat head on. Chancellor Oren, looking older and more tired than Elara had ever seen him, was arguing for diplomatic envoys. They're exiles, one of the generals snarled. You can't negotiate with people who have nothing to lose. You can if you give them something, Elara said. Everyone turned to look at her. Kael raised an eyebrow. Explain. Elara moved to the map spread across the table, studying the northern territories. The wastelands are brutal, inhospitable. The exiles aren't marching south because they suddenly developed loyalty to Baroness Torvin. They're marching because they're desperate, starving, dying. So we should just let them invade? Oren demanded. No, we should offer them an alternative. Elara traced a line on the map. These territories here, the ones between the wasteland and our border, they're unclaimed, empty. If we opened those lands for settlement, gave the exiles a chance to build something instead of taking it by force, maybe they'd take it. And if they don't? Greaves asked. Then we fight, but at least we'll know we tried diplomacy first. The room fell silent. Kael was studying her, his expression unreadable. It's a risk, he said finally. If we offer and they refuse, we look weak. If we offer and they accept but then betray us, we've given them staging ground right on our doorstep. Everything's a risk, Elara said. But fighting 5,000 desperate people is a guaranteed bloodbath. This gives us a chance to avoid that. More arguing, more debate. But slowly, grudgingly, the council came around. Not because they loved the plan, but because they couldn't come up with a better one. Fine, Kael said. We send envoys. But we also prepare for war. If this doesn't work, I want every soldier we have ready to march. He looked at Elara. You're coming with me. Where? To the border. To meet with whoever's leading this army. If we're going to make this work, they need to see that the alliance is real. That it's not just wolves ruling humans or humans manipulating wolves. They need to see us together. Elara's heart pounded. When do we leave? Dawn. They rode out with a small force, 50 wolves, enough to look serious but not threatening. Ronan came, despite Kael's initial protests. So did Greaves and Sarah. Chancellor Oren stayed behind to manage the Dominion in their absence. The journey north took 4 days. The landscape grew harsher with each mile, trees giving way to rocky hills, then barren plains scarred by ice and wind. By the time they reached the border outpost, Elara's face was numb from cold, and her hands ached even inside thick gloves. The outpost was a grim place, a cluster of stone buildings huddled against the elements, manned by soldiers who looked like they'd forgotten what warmth felt like. The commander, a weathered woman named Captain Reese, greeted them with a salute and a warning. They're camped about 10 miles north, she said. Scouts report they're waiting for something. Orders, maybe. Or reinforcements. Have they tried to communicate? Kael asked. Once. Sent a rider with a message 2 days ago. Said they wanted to talk to the Alpha King, face to face. Kael and Elara exchanged glances. So we talk, Elara said. It could be a trap, Greaves warned. Everything could be a trap, Kael said. But if they wanted to kill me, there are easier ways. Send word that we'll meet. Neutral ground, tomorrow at noon. The meeting place was a stretch of frozen ground between two hills, open, exposed, nowhere to hide. Kael brought 20 wolves. The exile army sent their leader with an equal number. Elara's first thought when she saw him was that he looked familiar. Her second thought was that he looked like death-given form. He was tall, gaunt, with scars covering his face and arms. His clothes were patched and worn, his weapons crude but well-maintained. But his eyes burned with an intensity that made Elara's skin crawl. Alpha King, the man said. His voice was rough, like gravel scraping stone. Thank you for coming. Who are you? Kael demanded. My name is Reth. I lead what's left of the northern clans, the ones your Baroness sent to die in the wastes. Torvin acted without my knowledge or approval, Kael said. Her crimes were her own, and yet we still suffer for them. Reth's gaze shifted to Elara. And this is the human queen, the one who exposed the conspiracy. Yes, Elara said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Reth studied her for a long moment. They said you were weak, that you'd break under pressure, but you're still here, still standing beside the Wolf King. That takes courage. Or stupidity, Elara said. Reth's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Maybe both. He turned back to Kael. We're not here to invade. We're here because we're dying. The wastelands don't sustain life. They consume it. We've lost half our people to cold and starvation in the past year alone. Then why bring an army? Because asking nicely has never worked for people like us. Reth's voice hardened. But your queen suggested an alternative. Land, settlement rights, a chance to build instead of beg. Kael glanced at Elara, surprised. Word travels fast. We have spies too, Reth said. Bad ones, but they exist. He pulled out a rolled map and spread it on the frozen ground. These territories, the unclaimed lands between your border and the waste. You open them for settlement, guarantee our people safe passage and protection, and we swear loyalty to the Dominion. That's a lot to ask, Greaves muttered. It's a lot to give, Reth shot back. 5,000 people who know how to survive in impossible conditions. 5,000 fighters who could reinforce your northern defenses. 5,000 lives that could either strengthen your alliance or destroy it. Your choice. Kael was silent, thinking. Elara could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing risks, measuring options, trying to see 3 moves ahead. I need guarantees, Kael said finally, that you won't use those lands as a staging ground for raids, that you'll integrate with Dominion law, that you'll contribute to the alliance, not just take from it. Done. But I need guarantees too, that you won't abandon us the moment it's inconvenient, that our people will be treated as equals, not second-class citizens, that this alliance your queen keeps talking about actually means something. Kael extended his hand. You have my word. Reth looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then he took it. Then we have a deal. The handshake lasted seconds, but Elara knew she was watching history being made, or unmade, depending on whether this worked. As they rode back to the outpost, Ronan pulled his horse alongside Elara's. That was insane, he said. Which part? All of it. Offering land to exiles, bringing them into the Dominion, trusting them not to stab us in the back the first chance they get. Do you have a better idea? Ronan was quiet for a moment. No, but that doesn't mean I'm not terrified this is going to blow up in our faces. Me too, Elara admitted. But doing nothing guarantees war. At least this way we have a chance. So, the integration wasn't smooth. Nothing ever was. The first group of exiles arrived 3 weeks later, 200 men, women, and children, gaunt and hollow-eyed, carrying everything they owned in makeshift packs. They looked at the settlement lands Kael had designated with a mixture of hope and disbelief, like they were waiting for someone to tell them it was a trick. Elara was there to greet them. So was Kael, flanked by guards but making an effort to look approachable. The contrast was stark: the polished, powerful king and the refugees who'd been left to die. "Welcome to the Dominion," Kael said. His voice carried across the assembled crowd. "These lands are yours now. Build on them, farm them, make them home. The Alliance protects all its people, human, wolf, and everyone in between." A woman stepped forward from the exile group, older, with gray hair and a face mapped with wrinkles. "And if we fail, if the crops don't grow or the winters are too harsh, then we help you," Elara said. "That's what the Alliance is for. We succeed together or we fail together. There's no middle ground anymore." The woman studied her, then nodded slowly. "All right, we'll try." It wasn't a ringing endorsement, but it was a start. Over the following months, more exiles arrived. The settlements grew, and with growth came problems. Disputes over resources, cultural clashes, old grudges that flared up despite everyone's best intentions. Elara spent more time traveling than she did at the castle. She mediated arguments, negotiated compromises, and slowly built relationships with people who'd been taught to see her as the enemy. It was exhausting, frustrating. Some days she wanted to scream, but it was working. One afternoon, she found herself in a newly built settlement called North Haven, watching as exiled children played with human and wolf children in the muddy square. They were shrieking and laughing, completely oblivious to the fact that their parents had been enemies a year ago. "That's what it's supposed to look like," a voice said behind her. Elara turned. Reth stood there, looking less skeletal than he had at their first meeting. Regular meals had filled out his face, and there was color in his cheeks that hadn't been there before. "What?" Elara asked. "Peace. Integration. Whatever you want to call it." Reth gestured at the playing children. "My daughter's the one with the dark hair. She's playing with a wolf cub and a human girl from the Southern Territories. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have believed that was possible. It almost wasn't. But it is, because you and your king decided to take a risk on people everyone else had written off." Reth's expression was serious. "I owe you for that. We all do." "You don't owe me anything. You're doing the work, building the settlements, making it real. With your support, with resources you could have kept for yourselves." Reth paused. "There are still people in the Dominion who think this was a mistake, who think we're parasites, threats. They're not wrong to be wary. We would have killed them all if we'd had to. But you saw past that, saw what we could be instead of just what we'd been forced to become." Elara's throat tightened. "I was an outsider once. Not so long ago. I know what it's like to be judged before anyone knows you, to be seen as a problem instead of a person. I just didn't want anyone else to go through that if I could help it." Reth smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. "Your king's lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," Elara said. "He gave me a chance when he didn't have to. Trusted me with real responsibility. Let me prove I was more than just a treaty signature." "That's not luck. That's love." Before Elara could respond, a commotion erupted near the settlement's edge, shouting, the clash of steel. Elara's hand went to her knife as she ran toward the noise, Reth close behind. They found 2 men fighting, one exile, one wolf from Kael's guard. A crowd had formed, some shouting encouragement, others trying to pull the fighters apart. Blood stained the mud. "Enough!" Elara's voice cut through the chaos. Both men froze, chests heaving. "What happened?" "He called my people savages," the exile snarled. "Said we didn't deserve to be here." "He stole from our supplies," the wolf shot back. "Took grain that was meant for the Dominion's soldiers." "We're part of the Dominion now," the exile said. "Or doesn't that actually mean anything?" Elara looked between them, her mind racing. This was the moment, the test. Handle it wrong, and she'd lose the fragile trust they'd built. Handle it right, and maybe, just maybe, they'd move forward. "You're both right," she said finally. "And you're both wrong." Both men stared at her. "You," she said to the exile. "You're part of the Dominion now. That means you follow Dominion law. Taking supplies without authorization is theft, regardless of whether you're hungry or think you're entitled to them. There's a system for distributing resources. Use it." The exile's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Elara turned to the wolf. "And you, if you're going to represent the Dominion, you need to actually believe in what it stands for. These people aren't savages. They're survivors. And yes, they're going to make mistakes as they figure out how things work here. But calling them names and treating them like invaders isn't going to help anyone. The wolf looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Elara's expression stopped him. Yes, Lady Voss, both of you are going to spend the next 3 days working together, Elara continued. Building, hauling, whatever needs doing. By the end of it, I want you to be able to tell me 3 things you respect about each other. If you can't, you'll do another 3 days. That's, the exile started. Non-negotiable, Elara finished. We don't have the luxury of old grudges anymore. Either we move forward together, or we all fall apart. Your choice. She walked away before either of them could respond, her heart pounding. Behind her, she heard Reth chuckle. Brutal, he said, catching up to her. I like it. I have no idea if it'll work. Doesn't matter. You showed strength. Made it clear there are consequences for divisiveness. That matters more than whether those 2 idiots learn to like each other. Elara hoped he was right. 3 weeks later, she received word that both men had requested to work on a joint patrol unit, exiles and Dominion wolves together, monitoring the northern border. The report said they'd become something close to friends. Small victories. That's what this was built on. When Elara returned to the castle after 2 months on the road, she found Kyle waiting in the courtyard. He looked tired. There were new lines around his eyes, and his shoulders carried a tension that hadn't been there before. Rough time? She asked as he helped her dismount. The council's been difficult. Oren's still pushing back on some of the resource allocations. Says we're overextending. Kale's hands lingered on her waist. I missed you. I was gone for 2 months. I know. It felt longer. Elara kissed him, right there in the courtyard, not caring who saw. When they broke apart, Kyle was smiling. Come on, he said. I have something to show you. He led her through the castle to a room she'd never been in before. A small chamber on the upper floor with windows that overlooked the garden and the lands beyond. Inside there was a desk, bookshelves, chairs by the fireplace. What is this? Elara asked. Your office, Kyle said. Official chambers for the Queen. Oren fought me on it, said it was setting a dangerous precedent. I told him the precedent was already set and he could either accept it or find a new job. Elara's eyes stung. Kyle, you've been doing the work of 3 people while sleeping in spare rooms and working out of hallways. You deserve a space that's yours, where you can meet with people, make decisions, build what you've been building. She turned to face him. This is more than an office. I know. Kale's expression was serious. It's recognition. Official acknowledgement that you're not just my wife or a figurehead, you're a leader, a force, someone who's changed this kingdom in ways I couldn't have managed alone. Elara didn't cry often, but standing in that room, looking at the man who'd rejected her and then slowly, painfully learned to see her, really see her, the tears came anyway. Thank you, she whispered. Kyle pulled her close. No, thank you. For not giving up. For fighting when it would have been easier to walk away, for making me better than I was. They stood there for a long time, holding each other as the sun set beyond the windows. The winter feast that year was different. The Great Hall was packed, nobles and commoners, wolves and humans, even a delegation from Reth settlements. The long tables groaned under the weight of food. Torches blazed, music filled the air. Kale stood at the high table, raising his glass. The hall fell silent. A year ago, he began, his voice carrying to every corner, I married a woman I didn't know, made promises I didn't believe in, created an alliance I thought would crumble the moment it was tested. He paused, looking at Elara. I was wrong about all of it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This alliance, this kingdom we're building, it's stronger than I could have imagined. Not because we're perfect, not because we've solved every problem, but because we have people willing to do the hard work, to show up, to fight for something better. His eyes never left Elara. And we have a queen who's shown us what true strength looks like. Not domination, not force, but the courage to stand up when everyone's trying to push you down. The determination to build when it's easier to destroy. The wisdom to see people as they could be, not just as they are. The hall erupted in cheers. Elara felt her face flush, but she kept her composure. Kale raised his glass higher. To the Alliance. To the future. And to the woman who made me believe both were possible. To the Queen! The hall roared back. Elara stood, her own glass raised. And to all of you, she said, her voice somehow cutting through the noise. Because we did this together, and we'll keep doing it together. One stubborn, difficult, impossible day at a time. Laughter. More cheers. Someone started a song, a drinking ballad that was probably inappropriate but made everyone smile anyway. As the feast continued, Elara found herself pulled into conversation after conversation. A human merchant wanting to discuss new trade routes. A wolf elder thanking her for mediating a boundary dispute. One of Reth's people asking if she'd visit the northern settlements again soon. Hours later, when she finally managed to slip outside for air, she found Ronan leaning against the wall, watching the stars. "Big night," he said. "Exhausting, but good." "Yeah, good." Elara leaned beside him. "How are you doing, really?" Ronan was quiet for a moment. "Better. Still get looks sometimes, still hear whispers. But there's this kid, one of the exile children. He told me I was his hero because I helped protect the Queen when she went north. Made it all worth it, somehow." "You are a hero, Ronan. Don't let anyone tell you different. Even when I screw up? Especially then. Heroes aren't perfect. They're just people who keep trying even when it's hard." Ronan smiled. "When did you get so wise?" "Somewhere between getting married to a man who hated me and rebuilding a kingdom from scratch. It's been a busy year." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the castle windows glow with warmth and light. Finally, Ronan spoke. "You know what the craziest part is? A year ago, if someone had told me that the human queen would be the one holding this whole thing together, I'd have laughed in their face. Now I can't imagine it any other way." "That makes two of us," Elara said. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and bringing green things back to life. The settlements flourished, trade routes expanded. The council, while still prone to arguing, managed to actually pass legislation that helped people instead of just enriching the powerful. It wasn't perfect. There were still fights, still setbacks, still days when Elara wanted to throw something at a wall and scream. But it was working. One morning, Elara woke to find Kael already awake, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked, her voice still rough with sleep. "I love you," he said simply. "Just wanted to say it." Elara smiled. "I love you too. But why do you look so serious?" Kael sat up, running a hand through his hair. "I've been thinking about what comes next." "What do you mean?" "The alliance is stable. The settlements are thriving. We've built something real here, Elara. Something that's going to outlast us." He turned to face her fully. "I want to make it official, not just the marriage. We've already done that twice. I want to codify everything we've built, create a formal government structure that includes humans and wolves equally, strip away the old hierarchies that say one group is inherently better than another." Elara's heart pounded. "That's going to be incredibly unpopular with the old guard." "I know, but it's right. And I think if we don't do it now, while we have momentum, we never will." "When were you planning to propose this?" "At the next council meeting. 3 days." Kael's eyes were serious. "I need you with me on this, Elara. I can't do it without you." "You could," Elara said, "but you don't have to. I'm with you. Always." The council meeting was brutal, exactly as they'd expected. Orin objected. Several of the older nobles objected. Even some of the younger wolves argued that it was too much, too fast, too dangerous to dismantle systems that had worked for centuries. But Elara stood beside Kael and made her case. She talked about the settlements, about the children growing up together, about the future they could build if they were brave enough to let go of the past. And slowly, grudgingly, the council agreed. Not unanimously, but by enough of a margin that it mattered. The new government structure was drafted, debated, refined. It took 6 months to finalize, but when it was done, they had something unprecedented, a true coalition government where humans and wolves held equal power, where decisions were made by consensus instead of decree, where the old ways of might makes right were replaced by something more complicated but infinitely more fair. Historians would later call it the Thornridge Accords. The moment when a brutal frontier kingdom transformed into something resembling a democracy. But the people who lived it just called it survival. On the 1 year anniversary of their second wedding, the one they'd chosen, not the one forced on them, Kael and Elara stood in the garden where they'd made their vows. The plants had grown. What had been struggling seedlings were now established, thriving. Flowers bloomed in colors that seemed impossible after the long winter. I never thanked you, Kael said quietly. For what? For not leaving. For fighting when I gave you every reason to give up. For seeing something in me, in us, worth saving. Elara took his hand. You would have done the same. I don't know if that's true. I do. She squeezed his fingers. You're stubborn, infuriating, emotionally unavailable half the time, but when it matters, you show up, you fight, you protect the people you love, even when it costs you everything. That's supposed to be a compliment? It's the truth. Which is better? Kael laughed, pulling her close. They swayed there in the garden, no music, no audience, just two people who'd found each other in the wreckage and decided to build something better. What do you think happens next? Elara asked. More problems, more challenges, more impossible situations that we'll somehow have to solve. Can't wait. Liar. Maybe a little. Elara pulled back to look at him. But we'll figure it out, together. Together, Kael agreed. They stood there as the sun climbed higher, warming the earth, coaxing life from soil that had seemed dead just months before. Around them, the kingdom continued its work, people building, arguing, laughing, living. It wasn't the ending Elara had imagined when she'd walked down the aisle in a dress too heavy and a future too uncertain. It was better, because she'd written it herself, claimed it, fought for it until it became real. And in that garden, surrounded by things she'd planted and nurtured into life, Elara understood something fundamental. She'd been traded like livestock, rejected, dismissed, underestimated at every turn. But she'd survived. More than survived, she'd conquered, not through submission, not through silence, but through the revolutionary act of refusing to be less than she was. She'd shown them all what a human queen could do in a wolf kingdom. She'd shown them that strength came in forms they'd never imagined. She'd shown them that love, real love, earned and fought for, could transform everything. And that made all the difference. Years later, when her daughter asked her what it had been like, that first terrible year when everything seemed impossible, Elara would smile and say, "It was the hardest thing I've ever done, and the best, because I learned that you can't wait for the world to give you permission to be who you are. You have to take it, fight for it, build it yourself from nothing but will and stubborn refusal to break." Were you scared? Her daughter would ask. Terrified. Every single day. But you did it anyway. I did it anyway, because fear is just a feeling. It doesn't get to make your choices for you. And her daughter, fierce and brave and carrying the legacy of two worlds in her blood, would understand. The alliance would grow. The settlements would flourish. The Dominion would transform into something no one could have predicted, a true coalition where the old hierarchies crumbled and something better, if messier, took their place. But that night, standing in the garden with the man she'd learned to love and the kingdom she'd helped save, Elara didn't think about the future. She thought about the present, about warmth and safety, and the quiet triumph of still being here, still fighting, still building, still refusing to break. And that was enough. Part 5. Bo Sung Kuoi. 20 years later, Elara stood on those same battlements where she'd once felt like a prisoner in her own life. Her hair had threads of silver now, and there were lines around her eyes that spoke of laughter and worry in equal measure. Below, the castle courtyard bustled with activity. But it was different now. Human merchants haggled with wolf traders without fear. Children of mixed heritage ran freely, their existence a living testament to bridges built and walls torn down. Mother! Elara turned to see her daughter, Lyra, 17 and fierce, with her father's eyes and her mother's stubborn chin, jogging up the stairs. The delegation from the Eastern Kingdoms is here. Father says they're requesting your presence specifically. Mine? Not your father's? Lyra grinned. Apparently they've heard stories. About the human queen who tamed the wolf king and rebuilt a kingdom with nothing but spite and intelligence. That's not how it happened, isn't it? Elara laughed despite herself. Go tell them I'll be down shortly. Lyra started to leave, then paused. Mother? Do you ever regret it? Staying? Fighting for all of this? Elara looked out over the kingdom, her kingdom, earned not inherited, and thought about that terrified girl who'd walked down an aisle toward a man who didn't want her. Not once, she said, because I learned something important that year. You don't need permission to matter. You don't need someone else to tell you you're worth something. You just need to refuse to accept anything less than what you deserve. Even when everyone tells you you're wrong? Especially then. Lyra nodded, absorbing this. Then she smiled, bright and certain, and ran back down the stairs. Elara took one more moment, breathing in the cold air, feeling the weight of years and triumphs and battles fought and won. She'd been a pawn, then a survivor, then a queen, but most importantly, she'd been herself, uncompromising, unbroken, undeniably real, and in a world that had tried to make her small, she'd dared to be enormous. Kael appeared beside her, his own hair now more gray than dark, his face weathered but his eyes still sharp. Ready? He asked, offering his hand. Elara took it, their fingers interlocking with the ease of decades of practice. Always, she said. Together, they walked down to meet whatever came next, because that's what they did, what they'd always done. They showed up, they fought, they built, together. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered, not the one about kingdoms and alliances and political maneuvering, but the one about two broken people who'd refused to stay broken, who'd chosen each other over and over until choosing became breathing, who'd proven that love wasn't about perfection, it was about showing up on the hard days and deciding to try again, and again, and again. Until one day, you looked back and realized you'd built something extraordinary from the ruins of what you thought your life would be. That was their legacy. Not crowns or treaties or historical accords, but the quiet revolutionary act of refusing to give up on themselves, on each other, on the possibility that even in the darkest places light could grow. And as they entered the great hall together, king and queen, partners, survivors, still fighting for the kingdom they'd built from ashes, Elara smiled, because she'd done what everyone said was impossible. She'd conquered a kingdom without an army. She'd tamed a wolf without chains. She'd written her own ending, and it was better than any fairy tale.